Hey, welcome back everyone. So on this video, the wife got into doing some canning because we're in the middle of harvest season right now, and the potatoes and the peppers, tomatoes and peppers are coming off the garden really good. So she's been doing salsa sauces, spaghetti sauces, that kind of stuff. So we need some shelves. So I need to make her some new ones to put all of her jars on. So we wanted to come up with something simple, cheap as usual. I'm going to use the skid wood. I've already cut it down just roughly into 1.5-inch squares, and we're going to plane it to get it nice and smooth. I'm going to make frames for the shelves out of this. The length of these as they come are about 41 inches, so my shelves are going to be 40 inches by 16 inches deep. And I'm going to do, I think, 3 or 4 shelves. 4 shelves I think I had figured out with a foot of space between each one. So as the jars get shoved to the back of the shelf, even though the jar may only be 9 inches high, you're not trying to see what's back there. So we'll give it a little bit of extra room to do that. And we're going to do 2 units, each one 4 shelves high. That should give her more than enough space to put all of her canned goods on, or rather her canning products or whatever on. And to do it cheap, so we're using skid wood to do the frames for the shelves. Again, we'll use skid wood for the legs, for the height, so this will be the top shelf. I went to the hardware store this morning and I bought a 4x8 sheet of, I think it's masonite or hardwood or something they call it. It's only 1/8 of an inch thick, very smooth on both sides. $10 for a 4x8 sheet. I had them rip it down into 3 16-inch widths, and then I brought it home and used a table saw to cut the 40-inch lengths that I wanted. I had to get them to rip it down because I don't have a pickup truck to put the 4x8 sheet in, just the car. So that's why I had them rip it down. So that's the plan for that. If you've been following this channel at all, you'll know the very first video was fixing that wood planer. And one of the bushings were gone, and we remade one ourselves out of a block of aluminum that we had melted and formed into the shape we wanted, things like that. So I'll stop the video here, I'll plane up a bunch of wood, and then we'll come back. So it was only 1/8 of an inch thick. So on its own, it's not enough to support the weight of her jars. So I'm going to build a frame that goes all the way around the perimeter of that shelf with one brace across the center of it. So they're going to be 13 inches long. For those braces or the pieces that go from front to back, once they fit in between the front and the back rails. I'll give you an example here. You know, if that's the back of the shelf and the front of the shelf, and I've already cut some. Sorry, walking around there. So that'll be an end of a shelf. The other end will be the same, and then we'll have one in the center to help support the weight of that thin material that we're using for the shelving. So for these, to cut these all down nice and uniform, keep them all exactly the same size, it's easier to set up your saw with a scrap piece of wood clamped onto the rip fence, and I want these to be 13 inches. This piece of wood is 3/4 of an inch thick, so I've set my fence back here at 13 3/4 of an inch. So what happens, so your piece of wood is up against that scrap that you've clamped onto your fence, and as you get to the blade, just as it's about to start cutting, it drops away from that scrap piece of wood, so there's no binding in between the fence and the blade with your 13-inch piece of wood, because you've now got that extra gap of space down here at the end. And you can, and when this one's cut off, you slide your piece of wood up to your next one, and every one of them is going to come out to be the exact same size. So I'm just going to finish cutting up these ones that are going to do those end pieces and the center supports of the frames. These are all going to be the fronts and backs of the frames. And then I think we're just going to glue, we'll use wood glue on the corners, and maybe 1 3-inch screw through these and into those cross pieces that we're going to use, and that's all we're going to do for the frames. So we'll come back, we'll do that, assemble a bunch, and then we'll come back. I've got 2 frames left to put together, so I'm on the last 2 now. I'll show you what I've been doing. So I can pick out which way I want to rotate the wood. So in this case, where the nail holes were from when this was part of the skid, I'm using face up. So when I put the shelves on, that'll be covered. Not that anyone's really going to see it anyhow, but at least I know it's all covered up. The shorter ones that I cut for braces, same thing. You can select which side is the worst side, have it facing up so that your shelf top is going to cover all that up. So I do that, I measure out 20 inches and mark where my center is, so I know where that board's going to be in the center for a brace. Start the screws in it so that when you're just kind of trying to put it all together, you're not starting a screw from a dead stop, trying to get it started into the wood. And all we're doing is putting a little bit of glue and one screw on each of these joints. And when you're using skids like this, the ones that I get from work, some of them are hardwood, some of them are softwood. So you can pick through and use what you want. I use softwood for this. It saves me pre-drilling any holes for screws, things like that. And it's not, if you were going to put stain on it or varathane because you wanted it to be out in the open where people would see it, I'd select a better hardwood stuff to use, but this is all going to be covered up. No one's going to see it. It's just for storage purposes. So this stuff is going to work out just fine. So my frames are all made. I didn't tell you so I had told you that I bought this stuff that's only 1/8 of an inch thick. Not sure how close I am there, whether it shows up. It's really smooth on both sides. There was enough of this in a 4x8 sheet to do 6 shelves, and I'm doing a total of 8, 4 on each unit. I had some 1/2 inch plywood left over, so I just cut a couple of pieces using the 1/2 inch plywood that was left over. I'm going to use these for the very bottom 2 shelves. We try not to waste anything, so I keep all my scraps and things when I'm doing projects, because something will turn up that even the smallest scrap will end up being used for something. At the very least, it'll end up in the burn pit and the ashes and the sawdust from all of this. I don't know if you can see the pile of sawdust underneath the planer back there from planing all this wood. That sawdust will all end up in the garden. We don't need any mulch or anything in the garden right now at this time of year, but come fall, I'll have bags of that stuff and I'll start dumping all that in the gardens and let it help rot down over the winter and help fertilize the garden. So we try and make use of everything that we can. It's just too costly to have to go and buy fertilizer or things like that, or even wood. If you've got scraps around that you can use for stuff, you can sometimes save quite a bit of money from having to go to the lumber store and buy a small piece of lumber to do a project. So I'll get the surfaces mounted on those frames for the shelves, and then we'll come back and I'll show you what I'm going to do with the legs for this. We've got our legs cut down to the size that we want, and I told you I'd bring back and show you what I'm doing with the legs. I don't want to glue the shelves to the legs. This is only 40 inches high because that's the length of the 2x4s that I got from the skids that I worked with. If I had longer wood, I would have just made the shelves taller instead of making 2 that are only 40 inches high. So sometime I may get some longer pieces of scrap wood to use and make longer legs. So I don't want to glue the shelves to the legs. But to give them some stability, to make sure they're not going to fall once they get the weight of all of these full jars on them, I'm just going to router not router, but I'm using the saw to cut 1/4 of an inch deep into the leg so the shelf will sit in 1/4 of an inch deep. So it'll have kind of a lip to sit on. So that'll support the weight, and I'm just going to put one screw through the leg into the shelf just to hold the leg in tight to the shelf, and that's all. So I've done the bottoms. If you remember, I had the leftover plywood, so I cut 2 shelves out of that. I'm going to use that for the bottom shelves in both of these units. So it's a little bit deeper than all the rest of these are with this 1/8 inch material on it. So I've gone ahead and done the bottom piece already, and I've marked them all out for where the rest of the shelves will be. And I'm going to just cut those 1/4 of an inch deep in these legs now. I pencil marked, so I need to cut from here to here 1/4 of an inch deep. So I've set the blade at 1/4 of an inch deep, and my pencil mark, I screwed a piece of wood to my guide here to push the wood through, and the edge of this piece of wood is perfectly in line with the blade because I used the blade to cut it off after it was screwed onto this. So if I line up my pencil marks with the edge of this piece of wood, I know that's exactly where my blade's going to cut where I want it to. So it takes a bit of time doing it this way. I only have a single blade, 1/8 of an inch wide. This is where, and someday I will get what they call a dado head set. And it's basically 2 saw blades that comes in a kit with a series of spacers. And by putting the spacers between the 2 blades, it angles the blades. And you can usually get, I think it's up to 3/4 of an inch wide with the widest spacers that they give you. And the blades run on an angle, kind of like a triangle. So it takes out the full 3/4 of an inch width of material as the blade's coming around in the wood. It would make this sort of a job much faster, much cleaner. What I have to do with the single blade is a number of passes to get most of the material out. Then I come back with a hand chisel and just clean it up, taking out any little bits of wood that are left in there from where I may have missed, spacing with the saw blade or something. So I'll turn the volume down and leave the camera running while I do a couple so you can see what I'm talking about. I don't know if the camera from that far away is picking up what I'm doing. That's why I'm kind of working in a funny angle, hoping that maybe it is picking it up and we can see, although I doubt it being that far away. So the idea is that cleans out a little bit of a groove, and if we've measured it out right, that shelf will sit in that groove. And if we're off a little bit, no, we're right on the money with that one. So I don't know if you can see from that far away, that shelf sits in there just on that 1/4 inch piece of wood. It's enough to support the shelf. So one screw through the leg into it, we'll just keep it there, and that's all we're going to do. So I'll go ahead and I'm going to do all of my saw cuts all at one time. Then I'll come back and do all of the hand chisel work to clean them all out. It takes a bit of time, but time I have. Okay, well, there's our shelves. So our total cost for this project was 20 bucks. It was $10 for this sheet of this 1/8 inch thick wood. $10 for that, $10 for a box of screws that I had to buy. Used just about all of the screws. So it was a cheap project for the shelves. Total time to do this project with planing all of the wood, notching it all out for the shelves to sit in, was about an 8-hour project. Not bad. It was a lot of wood planing and stuff like that. That takes time because you have to take it off slowly in layers. I did only put one screw in the end, just enough to hold the leg in place. They'll be plenty strong enough. So I'm not worried about these collapsing when she puts her canned goods on them. And if you measure out a 500 milliliter jar, each one of these shelves will hold about 60 of those jars. So there's 240, almost 500 jars worth of storage capacity, more than we'll probably ever need. So I think that'll do. If we do get some longer 2x4s or something like that sometime in some skids, then maybe we'll build this into one 8-foot unit instead, or 7-foot unit, instead of having the two of them. But that's it for this project. Hope you learned something from me on it. Thank you for watching.